So I'm not going to give you the 5 principles of learning origins and insertions. I'm not going to talk about how I would go about learning the muscles. Instead, I'm going to demonstrate for you my actual process of learning a group of muscles. How I go from a hard to remember table or list of muscles that you might find in your textbook to an easy to remember interconnected picture in your brain that you'll be able to remember on test day. I'm going to show you my actual learning process, and it's a bit messy because learning is a bit messy. It should look a little bit messy. And I want to show you exactly what learning muscles, so that they stick in your brain, actually looks like. So let's jump to the whiteboard and get started. So here's the scenario I'm going to kind of run through. Let's say that you have a test coming up and you've got these 17 muscles. You've gotten this list from your professor in your class, and you need to know these 17 muscles. You need to know their origins, insertions, and their actions for that test that's coming up on Friday. And what you've done is you've gone to a table and you found a table of muscles. It looks something like this. In the table, and this is from the OpenStax textbook, which is a textbook I really like, and you've got all of these muscles in here, and each row has all these words, these long words like iliotibial tract, gluteal tuberosity. There's just all this stuff, and you've been studying that for hours and hours over the course of the past week, and it's just not sticking with you. But it's not how you want to be studying. It's really hard to get this table to stick in your brain and remember how all these complicated words kind of fit together. And so in this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through how I would go through studying this particular list of 17 muscles. I'm not going to go through all of them just for time's sake, but I'm going to show you my exact process. Here's how I would go about it. Now I'm going to use a table like this. I'm going to use this OpenStax table. I'm also going to use this table, which is from my muscular system guide. It's very similar. You'll see it's a little bit more streamlined. There's not as many words, and there's also an image or a picture for each of those in each column, in each row. So I'm going to use both of those to learn these muscles. And I'm also going to do it in a way where I'm going to leave the table. I'm going to be writing stuff. I'm not going to just rely only on the table, because I've got to transfer what's in the table into a different organized system that I can actually remember in my brain, because I can't remember a table, even a table I really like this one from my guide. My first step is to look through this list of muscles and see if there's any that I can identify as hey, these probably go together. I want to start grouping them together. Now, I'm going to pretend like I don't know much about these muscles. I'm going to look through them and I'm going to say, okay, those both say psoas in them, so maybe that's a group that'll kind of go together. And I'll look down and I'll say, okay, these all three say vastus, so there's probably some similarity in those. If I go down here, this whole group says adductor in it, so there's probably some sort of a group right there. And I noticed these last two both say semi, so I don't know, I could be wrong, but maybe those are similar in some way. And so even though this is a very novice level of grouping at this point, because I'm pretending I don't know what the actual, how these things are grouped, that's a good way to start priming my brain for, okay, I don't want to memorize 17 different separate muscles. I want to start to group these and just memorize a few groups. And then within those groups, I can remember the differences between those muscles in the group. So from there, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start from the top, and I'm going to look these up in the reference table, whether it's in the guide or in the OpenStax textbook. And I'm going to find, what are the groups? And I'm going to start to kind of wrap my brain around what I'm looking at here. So I said psoas major and psoas minor. I'm going to look on here and find those. And I see right away in this section muscles of the hip and thigh. These are all hip and thigh muscles. And I see it immediately. It doesn't say psoas major and what it does there, but it actually lists this as the iliopsoas muscle. Interesting. And they combine the iliacus and the psoas major and say, that's sometimes just lumped together as the iliopsoas. So, okay, those two kind of go together. So maybe really my group is these three. In this table then, I also don't have the psoas minor. So I'm going to wonder about, okay, what's the deal with the psoas minor? It must be a less common muscle. It's not in this table. And in fact, if you look that up in the OpenStax textbook, it's not in the OpenStax textbook either. The iliopsoas group here, it lists the psoas major and the iliacus separately there, but not the psoas minor. So there may be times as you're studying and you've got your textbook or your reference that you're using, and you may have to look things up somewhere else. And that's totally fine. We want to ideally not just be pulling from only one source. We want to pull from several sources, because our goal isn't to learn whatever's on the paper. Our goal is to learn all of the stuff that we have to learn, and it doesn't matter what source we're going to get it from. It's probably better if we're kind of pulling from multiple sources. And then I'm going to look and see, okay, I've got these vastus muscles, I got the sartorius. So I'm going to go down and find, okay, here's the sartorius. I've got my picture here. It kind of wraps in front of some other muscles there. And I wonder, does that go with any other muscles? I look down here, I've got the quadriceps group. And interesting, this says rectus femoris, vastus lateralis, vastus medialis, and intermedius. Okay, those are those muscles that I had right here, but they include the rectus femoris with that. So not only do I need to group these vastus muscles together, and maybe they do have something in common, those three vastus, that'll be helpful for me, but also I want to lump in the rectus femoris. So I've got those as a group right there. For this video, for time, I'm actually going to kind of cut things off right there, and we'll just work on those first 8 muscles. And then these are going to be some other muscles I would go to next after that. But I'm going to kind of chunk these. And really, now I've taken these first 8, and I've got 3 groups that I want to learn. I've got the iliopsoas group. I've got this group right here, the quadriceps group, which I think is interesting. Quadriceps. Quad means 4. Oh, so these are the quads. And they're probably named that because there's 4 of them. And even if that were wrong, which is not, that's why they're named that. But even if that were wrong, that's a helpful, just like, connection to make that'll help me remember there's 4 muscles in this group. So as we go through this, we're always wanting to do the 3 verbs of encoding, which are to simplify, compare, connect, and to group. So I'm looking to do that as much as possible. I've already done some grouping. I've started making a few connections, just that quadriceps connection, for example. And then I'm trying to simplify this as well. By making these groups, I'm simplifying this. And you'll see in a minute, there's other things that I'll do to simplify this, such as looking for, like, are any of these muscles sharing an origin? Well, if they share an origin or share an insertion or share an action, that's like one less thing that I have to remember. And so I'm going to try to always simplify this whenever I can. And then within the groups, I'm going to compare, like, do these things have the same origin or not? And I can compare them, their locations and all that. The other thing that I kind of alluded to here is that what students do a lot of times is they go to this table. And even this textbook, it's got these really nice diagrams up here. But there's something about, like, moving from that diagram to the table and then back to the diagram where you just kind of, like, you get lost. You get lost in all of the stuff. And again, this table like this, we're going to use this table, but we're going to use it as it's intended, which is a reference. It's not meant to be, like, consumed just as is. It's a reference. It's just like I'm not going to go try to learn the encyclopedia. Those of you that are younger might not know what that is, but any reference text like a dictionary, like encyclopedia, we're going to go to that when we need information, but we're not going to just memorize that straight through. So I've got my list of muscles here. The other thing I have here is a skeleton. And the reason I have that on here is so that I can draw on these muscles, and that's going to help me kind of make sense of their spatial orientation and that sort of a thing. So next I want to go to this group right here, the iliacus, psoas major, and psoas minor. And for each of them, I want to try to make sense of where those are located. And I'm always going to start with an image of the muscle first. I don't want to try to get the origin insertion right away or even the action. I want to start with the image because if I can, it's easy to picture each muscle. That part's easy. It's hard to picture this table. So if I picture the muscle first, then I'm going to try to identify the origin insertion from that. And that's just going to help me remember those a lot easier. So let's start with the iliacus muscle. I'm going to go on my table here and find that iliacus muscle. It says this, here the 2 muscles share the same insertion. Okay, helpful to know. And they essentially connect the top half to the lower half of the body. Their action is to flex the hip, which if I look at my image here, it kind of makes sense. So I've got these muscles right here, and they would flex the hip. It looks like they're inserting somewhere down here, like maybe that's on the femur. I'm gonna have to look it up in the table in a second, but I'm already trying to, before I even look up that information on the table, I'm trying to, like, predict it. And that's gonna help my brain be able to make these connections easier. So I'm guessing the insertion is gonna be on the femur, the proximal part of the femur. And it looks like we've got origins here, like in the pelvis. That would be the ilium of the pelvis. And this one is going to go up here to, it looks like some of the vertebrae, and maybe it's going to multiple of these vertebrae there. I'm guessing this is going to be the iliacus because it's connected to the ilium. If I wasn't sure, I could just look that up real quick. I think this is the psoas major, and this must be the psoas minor. They're very similar, but this one's much smaller, so that's going to be my psoas minor right there. All right, so this iliacus right here, I know that the origin is probably the top of the ilium of the pelvis, and the insertion is going to be maybe the femur. And this one, it said that they share the same insertion. So this one right here is going to have that insertion down there, and the origin, it's like maybe this is L1 to L4 of the lumbar vertebrae. So now I'm going to go to my table and see if my origins and insertions were right, my predictions. And so the origin says ilium and lumbar vertebrae. So I think I had that right. We had the ilium right here for the iliacus, and the lumbar vertebrae for the psoas major, and then the lesser trochanter of the femur. Cool. So it does connect to the femur right in here, and it connects on the lesser trochanter. So now what I want to do is, and this is another thing that you should think about before you go learning all of these, is to what detail do you need to learn the origins and the insertions? Do you just need to know that the insertion is the femur? If that's all that you need to know, then you can kind of stop there. If you need to know that it's the lesser trochanter of the femur, or maybe, the lumbar vertebrae, do you need to just know that it's the lumbar vertebrae, or do you need to know which specific lumbar vertebrae it is? So that'll depend on the class that you're in. You should either ask your professor, or maybe your professor has told you kind of what level you need to know. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to my skeleton, and then I'm going to kind of map this out where this is going to be. So I know that this right here is the greater trochanter. The lesser trochanter is right there. Now, what if you didn't know that? If you didn't know that, then that's another thing that you need to look up. And it's totally fine to just type in lesser trochanter. And then up is going to pop an AI overview, of course. And then if you go to images, you can find what you're looking for. So here's just an image that came up from Teach Me Anatomy. We've got the greater trochanter on the lateral side, and we've got this little lesser trochanter sticking out right there. And that's where this muscle is going to have its insertion. So I'm going to sketch that on here. Now, I highly recommend you do some sketching, and I'm going to sketch on the skeleton. If you're like, I don't have that printed out, I'm just doing this on a sheet of paper. By the way, recommend using a sheet of paper. I'm on the iPad because it's easier to screen record. But earlier, I sketched out a very ugly skeleton, and I drew some of these muscles on there. So it's totally fine to just do a very rough sketch. Like, an ugly sketch is a great sketch when you're learning. It's not about making it look nice. So I'm going to go onto here, and I'm going to sketch out approximately where that iliacus muscle is. So it's going to be something kind of like this. All right, and that's my iliacus. And I could be misspelling that. If I am, that's totally fine. And then I know that my origin is the ilium, and my insertion is the femur, and I might want to be more specific, it's the lesser trochanter. And then I'm going to draw on the other muscle I learned, the psoas major. And so that's got the same origin right there, but it's going to go up and it's going to connect. It looked like it was connecting to some of these lumbar vertebrae. I'm going to say 1 through 4. If I need to know more specifically, I'm going to look that up and see if that is correct or not. The psoas major. And I know the psoas major, its origin is going to be the lumbar vertebrae. Sorry, my ugly handwriting right there. L vertebrae, and then my insertion is going to be that lesser trochanter of the femur. And I know the action for both of these. And you know what? One thing I can do, because I know these have a lot of similarities, is I can just say the action for both of these is to flex the hip. And I know that this is going to be that as well. So I'm like kind of grouping those together. Now we also saw that we had the psoas minor muscle. And so I'm going to sketch that in. But wait a minute, I do notice that on the psoas minor, it doesn't look like it's going all the way down. So maybe it's not doing the same things, and maybe it doesn't have the same insertion. So that one's not on here, and it's not in the open stack. So I need to look this up somewhere else. I could Google it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to click here. So in the guide that we have here, we have all these images, which are used with permission from anatomy.app. which is a program that I use a lot to learn anatomy. There's other programs too. If you've got BioDigital or access to Anatomize, or there's this one, there's a bunch of them out there. But I recommend having something like this that you can reference. If you're interested in anatomy.app, I've got an affiliate partnership with them. There's a link in the description, coupon code, all of that. But they're really helpful for this. The psoas minor right there. Okay, cool. So if I find the psoas minor, I see it looks like its insertion is going to be on this ridge of the pubis. That might be the iliopubis right there. And then it looks like it's got an origin on, I believe this is, I have to verify this. I think this is 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So it's L1 and T12. Cool. So I'm going to draw that in now. I'm going to use another color in my diagram here. And it looks like it kind of goes higher, but it's thinner. So it's going to go to those two and connect. And it's going to be this thinner muscle. It's going to go like that. So now I've got this one, which is the psoas minor. And it's going to have its origin, which are going to be the thoracic and lumbar vertebrae, T12L1, I think. It's going to have its insertion on the pubis of the pelvis. And then it's going to have the action, I assume, of flexing the hip as well. And so I would want to look that up and just to verify that. It's action stabilizing the hip, pelvis, and hip joint and flexion of the trunk. So I'm going to say it is still flexing kind of the hip and trunk and such there. Okay, cool. So now I've got all of those. What I would do then before I go on is actually try to see if I can list all of that out again from memory. And this first time I was looking it all up as I went. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up my eraser. I'm going to erase all of my hard work. And I'm going to, because the goal isn't to like make a nice diagram, right? Like the information is all there in the guides and the websites and all the stuff. What I want to do, what I'm trying to do is make sense of my brain. And so immediately I need to see, can I summarize all of this again? And so I'm going to go through this again. And so I know the lesser trochanter up to there, that's going to be and let me not fill it in. That way I can kind of write on there. So this is the iliacus. Oh my gosh. This is what my videos look like whenever I'm not editing them a bunch. So we have the iliacus. We know the origin is the ilium. We know the insertion is the femur, the greater trochanter. And I know I'm going to have the, looks like it's the, get that in there. This is going to be the psoas major. And I know it's going to have the same insertion, and it's going to have a different origin. So I'm going to list out its origin, which is the lumbar vertebrae. And then I'm going to draw in my little guy that goes a little bit higher there. And that's going to be the psoas minor. And I would say what its origin and insertion are. Now, if I need to know the specific vertebrae, I need to look that up. So, for example, the psoas minor is T12 and L1. The anatomy.app is going to go super in-depth with it, going into all of that. If I go back to here, and I find the iliopsoas group, the psoas major, it's lumbar vertebrae L1 through 5 and thoracic vertebrae T12. So it actually, the origin is going to expand a little bit farther than I thought. It's going to go from the T12 all the way down to L5. So it actually spans all of those. So if I need to know that, then at that point, I need to start listing that out and remembering that. And I can compare it to the psoas minor. The minor just inserts into 2. This is going to insert into 6. So I just remember 2 and 6. And I realized I just made a mistake, which is that that actually only goes to right there. And so I need to correct that. And that's why I'm doing this review and why I want to keep that in the video, because that's what the learning process looks like. It's messy. I make these nice videos where it seems like I know everything, but the learning process is messy. And this is the kind of stuff I have to go through in order to get to the point where I can make a nice video about something. Cool. I'm going to skip the sartorius because I want to use the quads as another example. So in the quads, we've got 4 muscles here. The rectus femoris, vastus lateralis, vastus medialis. And what I want to do is I want to go to my diagram. So let me find those. And it looks like there's 3 muscles here. This must be a lateralis, this in orange because it's more lateral. This must be the vastus medialis. And maybe I might think, this is wrong, but I might think maybe this is the vastus intermedius. At that point, I'm going to need to kind of look up and see like what are these muscles and where are which one's which here a little bit. And so we've got it on here. Here's the rectus femoris. Okay, so that's the rectus femoris. And look on here, the vastus intermedius, it's not even on that picture. It must be underneath those. So if I pull that up, I'm going to see here, okay, there's the vastus intermedius. It's going to be deep to that rectus femoris, but that's really helpful. And I want to start to make sense of all of this. Now I'm going to go here and see that what column is this? That's the action. They're going to extend the knee, which makes sense. Like they're going to be pulling. I'll go down to like the kneecaps and down to the tibia. So they're going to be pulling on that tibia to straighten out the leg to extend the knee. And then flexes the hip, and that says rectus femoris only, which is interesting because now I'm thinking immediately the rectus femoris is a little different. The vastus kind of go together. The rectus femoris is a little bit unique. It also flexes the hip, so I wonder if its origin is actually a little bit higher than the other three. I'm going to look at my table here and see, okay, the origin actually is the ilium for the rectus femoris. I was right, okay. And then the femur is going to be the origin for the three vasti, the vastus medialis, intermedius, and lateralis. Okay, cool. So I'm immediately kind of making some connections there. And then I also have the insertion, and the insertion here is going to be the tibial tuberosity of the tibia, kind of the tongue twister. And so what I want to do is I'm going to start to map this out separately, and I highly recommend doing that. I'm going to go back to the diagram in a minute, but I'm going to map these out here. So I know on the superficial side, we've got the rectus femoris, and then let's say this is the lateral side over here, and say this is the medial side over here. And so then we've got the vastus lateralis, we've got the vastus medialis, and then here we've got the vastus intermedius. And then I want to try to think through, and I'm doing this kind of spatially, which is helpful, and I want to try to think through what is similar and what is different about these. So I think it's all of these go down to the tibial tuberosity of the tibia. And if I look on here specifically, I can see these all connect here to the patella, sort of that patellar tendon, and that patellar tendon is going to go down to that tuberosity right there. I could look up in the open stacks. Here we go, vastus lateralis, intermedius, tibia fibula, and then for these tables I get lost in them a little bit. Origin and then insertion is these two. And so I can see all of these say patella and the tibial tuberosity. Okay, so that's going to be true for all of those. And here I've got a lot of differences here in the origins of all of these. So what I want to do is I don't want to list that out for all of them because I know that is something they all share in common. So I'm going to put that the insertion is the tibia, the tibial tuberosity. I'm going to say / patella. And I know that's true for all of these muscles. All of these muscles go down to there. And so I'm not going to try to remember that insertion separately for all of them. It's another example of like grouping. I'm going to group that. And then the other thing that I saw on my table here is that the rectus femoris has its origin on the ilium. So this one, its origin is the ilium, which is the pelvis. And then the other three have it on the femur, and it's got to be the top of the femur. So I'm also just wondering, is that going to be, maybe it's like one of the trochanters, like what it was? And that's where you need to know in your class. Do you just need to know it's the proximal part of the femur where they have the origin, or do you need to know specifically it's the greater trochanter or the intertrochanteric line, or the the more specific things there? So for the origin for all three of these is going to be the femur, and I know that's going to be true for all three. So maybe I want to just link these. Okay, those are all going to have that origin of the femur. Their action, they all have the same action, and they all have the same action, which was to extend the knee. And that's true for all of them. But I know, so like that's true for all of them, but I also know that the rectus femoris only has an action, which is to flex the hip. Now, if I need to know more specifically those origins, I might go to this table and see for each of those I've got, let's see, the rectus femoris. It's the anterior, inferior iliac spine. So I may need to look up the bony prominences on the ilium here and figure out what does that mean. Where is that? The superior margin of the acetabulum. Of course, the acetabulum is going to be where the the head of the femur is going to articulate, so it's going to be kind of above, somewhere like right in there, it looks like. The vastus lateralis, it's got the greater trochanter, the intertrochanteric line, the linea aspera. Those are things I would need to look up as well if I need to know in that detail. So that's where you just need to know. Now, how am I going to remember all of that if I do need to know it in that detail? Well, I'm going to try to look for a pattern. One pattern that I see here is the vastus lateralis. It's going to be with the greater trochanter. So I would start to kind of map this out then and say, okay, the greater trochanter, that's going to be the origin of the vastus lateralis. It makes sense. The greater trochanter is very lateral on the proximal part of the femur. And it also has the intertrochanteric line, so it's between the two trochanters. It's going to be somewhere in there. Probably not marking that exactly right. The linea aspera, maybe I need to look that up. The vastus medialis is mainly in the intertrochanteric line. So this one is going to be that medialis, which makes sense. That intertrochanteric line is more medial. And then the intermedius, that one's kind of unique, but it's just the proximal femur shaft. And so that shaft of the femur is like right there. So it's somewhere in there. Maybe I need to know more specific, but this is going to be the intermedius. And I'm going to kind of picture that in my mind. I do remember the intermedius is the deeper muscle to the rectus femoris. And so it's not even, it's like underneath all the ones. It's not extending up as high, which kind of makes sense. Like physically, something that's on top can go a little bit farther up. And so I'm mapping this out. On the very lateral side, I've got the lateralis. More medial to that, I've got the medialis. And then intermedius, I've got down there on the proximal femur shaft. So what I'm doing there is I'm not trying to just memorize these things only from the table. I'm also trying to visualize them on the bones as I'm learning each of those things. All right, and then the other one that we had there was the rectus femoris. And this one said the anterior inferior iliac spine, the superior margin of the acetabulum. The superior margin of the acetabulum is right there. So in that area is going to be the rectus femoris. And that makes sense. That one's going to be the more, and I kind of picture it like the rectus femoris goes from there all the way down. And then underneath that, I've got I'll do this one in green maybe, connected to right there. I've got that vastus intermedius. And so it kind of goes under that, something like that. And I've got the lateralis going like this. And I've got that medialis kind of going like that. Now, if somebody else sees that diagram, you're like, what am I looking at right there? But in my mind, that makes a lot of sense because I've gone through this process of mapping out each muscle on the skeleton and then looking for patterns and relative locations and then trying to simplify that. For example, I know that all of these are going to have that same insertion down here on the tibial tuberosity somewhere in there, as well as the patella right there. And I know they all have the same action of extending the knee, except for the rectus femoris, which is going to have the action of extending the knee, but also flexing the hip, I believe. So you can see I'm not just living in the table. The table is too hard to memorize. It's too many random things. And if I don't connect all these things together, I'm never going to remember these things. Much better is to map things out like this. Map it out on a skeleton. Also map it out on like a little kind of visual diagram like this. And then my next step, I'm not going to do this right now, but my next step would be literally to erase all of this, to remove all of this, or throw my piece of paper away, get out a new sheet of paper or a new skeleton diagram, and then see if I can map all these things that I've learned out from scratch, from memory. That active recall is going to build this even stronger in my brain. So yeah, I hope this video was helpful. Like I said, I have my muscle guide. Like if you're learning the muscles, this very long muscle guide has everything that you need to learn in one place for an A&P class for all the muscles. It covers literally everything from organization of the muscle, the sliding filament model, the sarcomere. It's got the types of muscle. It's got all of that in there. So if you're learning the muscles, check out the link in the description for that guide. And then if you are trying to improve your ability to learn anatomy and physiology in general, this video covers a lot of things that I teach in my program, the Memory Lab. And the whole purpose of that program is to help people who are trying to learn so much information, whether it's A&P or nursing classes or massage therapy classes or whatever it is that you're trying to learn, life science related. And I teach you exactly how to become a better learner of this particular type of content through things like this. I've got all kinds of learning demos. I teach you a little bit of theory about learning, but really dive into here are practical things that you can do in order to learn more effectively. So if that's helpful, I'll link to that in the description as well. All right, thanks for watching. Hopefully that was helpful. This is a bit different of a video, way less edited and a little more messy, but I think a lot of people might be able to benefit from it, so I wanted to post that here. All right, thanks. Have a great day.